Hello, this is Joseph Giunta, once again greeting you from my home studio. Thank you for joining the DMSO Listening Room, part of our DMSO at Home series. Many of our musicians have and will continue to create online content specifically for you, our loyal audience, whom we miss very much. I hope you've taken the opportunity to view some of these terrific online presentations. Past listening rooms have discussed the symphonies of Vaughan Williams, Beethoven, and Bruckner, as well as how I choose music for a Des Moines Symphony program. Last week I spoke about how non-classical music influenced my education as a symphony conductor. Today, I am pleased to discuss the opening concerts of the Des Moines Symphony's 83rd season, Beethoven 250. We plan to join orchestras all over the world to celebrate the great master's 250th birthday. And what better way to start the season off than with a masterpiece, his immortal Ninth Symphony. Let's set the scene. Once the most popular Viennese composer of the day, a rank he achieved by surpassing Mozart, our esteemed composer is now overshadowed by the highly entertaining Italian opera of the likes of Rossini. He is deaf, and he hasn't written anything for the orchestra in 10 years. He has little money, and his commissioning fee from the London Philharmonic, a pittance of only £50, did not even come close to the expense of composing it, much less producing it, and the production itself was fraught with frustrations for composer and performers alike. This was the birth of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. The piece had a gestation period of 30 years, from when he first read Schiller's Ode to Joy in the 1790s, later began to sketch the piece in 1815, and finally completed the score in 1824. Schiller's poem was brimming with hopes and expectations for the future. It was written, however, before the French Revolution, the Reign of Terror, and the Napoleonic era. The optimism of this poem and the reality of the world during Beethoven's lifetime were very different. But Beethoven's vision was clear from the beginning. He wanted to write a revolutionary work, a work that even when it was conflicted, tempestuous, or reflective, it expressed his profound love of humanity. This focused vision persisted throughout his life and culminated in one of the most significant works of art ever created, a work that is a testament to universal brotherhood. Beethoven's bold and unwavering vision for his musical creations, and in particular the Ninth, was his way of changing the world. And that's not an exaggeration. The influence that Beethoven had on those that followed him was unprecedented. Tchaikovsky wrote that Beethoven's music was colossal and titanic, and composed his Fourth Symphony with Beethoven's own Fifth in mind. Wagner thought Beethoven's Ninth Symphony held the secret of all secrets, and copied every note of it to better understand Beethoven's genius. Mahler was profoundly moved by Beethoven's music. Hector Berlioz thought Beethoven's Ninth was the culmination of his genius. Shostakovich wrote that Beethoven gave new, revolutionary ideas to the public and roused it to revolt against its masters. Even Stravinsky, who early in his life was outspoken about not liking Beethoven's music, eventually became a convert. In his 80s, he said, "I find newfound joy in Beethoven these days." On May 5, 1824, a Viennese newspaper promoted the much-anticipated premiere of Beethoven's Ninth with the words, "Anyone whose heart beats warmly for greatness and beauty will surely be present." It was 2 days prior to the program, which in addition to the symphony included Beethoven's Consecration of the House Overture and several movements of the Missa Solemnis. Now, let's take ourselves back to Beethoven's time and imagine what we would have heard at this concert. The sound of the instruments was very different than what we would hear today. The brass instruments were valveless, meaning the range of notes they could play was limited. The woodwinds were louder and more piercing than the strings. The timpani used animal skins for heads. The string section played on gut strings, giving clearer articulations and probably a brighter but maybe softer sound. While some musicians used the new, larger bows recently developed in Paris, the majority played with bows that were shorter than the bows of today. Thus affected how long they could sustain notes, and therefore tempos were always faster in Beethoven's day. The pitch was almost 1/2 step lower. Orchestra balance was way in favor of the winds, and most 19th century German orchestras used only 6 to 8 violins. By comparison, the Des Moines Symphony uses 30. Vibrato was used sparingly, and most notably, there were very few players that were actually up to the technical demands of his music. The level of performance was most likely equivalent to an average college orchestra of today, rather than the highly skilled ensembles to which we are accustomed. In fact, the first performance of our masterpiece, conducted by Beethoven himself, was by all accounts miserable. It's probably good he could not hear a note of it. It was hastily prepared and under-rehearsed. Reviews spoke of poor intonation and lack of finesse and execution, poor ensemble, and very weak playing. The music was so difficult that some of the string players set their bows down and refused to play many measures. If the notes got too high for the sopranos, well, they just left them out. Luckily for us, the orchestral tradition has grown over the last 2 centuries, so the symphony's brilliance and majesty was not lost in the wake of its tumultuous premiere. The first movement begins with a sinister and mysterious feeling in the murmuring of the strings. There's no time, only space. The horns and violins enter very softly, and as more instruments join in, the culmination of the first theme is an unparalleled emotional climax, played full-voiced at fortissimo, a mere 17 measures into the piece. Whereas most composers would have taken several minutes to unfold such an idea, his premise was more could be achieved by compression than expansion in this remarkable and unique opening. This movement alone was longer than many entire symphonies of his contemporaries. When I've conducted it, I always feel like the piece could end then. But of course, it doesn't. The second movement, Wagner called a miracle of repetition in monotony. It refers to the incessant da-da-da, 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 which is played delicately, elegantly, charmingly, boldly, sometimes cumbersomely, but is always used effectively within this movement. He writes ritmo de tre battute, and later ritmo de quattro battute, referring to his experimentation in phrasing. The musical phrases dart between ideas 3 bars and 4 bars long. It highlights his innate relationship with rhythm and creates a sense of spontaneity and excitement. And then comes the trio, a simple little march in D, which startlingly begins on beat 2 rather than on 1, once again challenging conventional use of rhythm and catching all his listeners off guard. His third movement, marked Adagio molto e cantabile, is stunningly beautiful and reflective music that seems to come from another world. The winds are prominent throughout, as is a fluidity in the first violins that is reminiscent of the Italian bel canto style that became so popular later in the century. This music ends peacefully with no hint of what is to come. Wagner called the opening of the monumental last movement Schreckensfanfare, a fanfare of terror. It opens with the dissonance of two chords played simultaneously, B-flat major and D minor. What follows is unprecedented musical drama. Lower strings play operatic-type recitatives, and the music of the previous three movements appears as if to remind us from whence we came. Then, a new theme is introduced, one that sounds so sweet and naive that many said it even made Beethoven smile. And then, something unheard of, a chorus and four vocal solos emerge, making this a combination of symphony, opera, and concerto. A Turkish march and a double fugue are the final factors, making this one of the most innovative and expressive works of art ever created. The question I ask myself every time I study this piece is, how did it become so exalted? Certainly the first performance of it did not merit immediate admiration. Furthermore, if Wagner had not championed it for the opening of his Festspielhaus in Bayreuth in 1872, it might have been forgotten. But this celebratory and historic performance was memorable, and the piece started to be programmed by prominent conductors of the day. Mahler conducted it for many significant occasions in Vienna in the early 1900s, and since then, it has cemented its place as the perfect piece for epic historical events. Bernstein conducted it for the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Simon Rattle performed it with the Vienna Philharmonic at a concentration camp in Austria for the 177th anniversary of its premiere. It has become a symbol for international events. My experience with the piece is that each and every performer, each and every listener, walks away with a sense of the majesty of the human experience and believing that all could be well with the world. That is what makes it so special. After all, isn't that at least one definition of great art? Thanks for joining me in the DMSO Listening Room. See you next time.